Next week marks 25 years since Australia's Port Arthur Massacre, a mass shooting that killed 35 people. Afterwards, automatic and semi-automatic rifles were banned in Australia. They enacted a national registry and a 28-day waiting period for all gun purchases. And 653,000 firearms were taken out of circulation in a national buyback program. Gun deaths in the country plummeted, and today mass shootings there are nearly non-existent. Compare that to America, the gun capital of the world, where last year there were nearly 12 gun deaths per 100,000 people, more than 14 times that of Australia. But there are some differences, of course. Australia doesn't have a right to bear arms in their constitution. They also don't have a powerful gun lobby like the NRA. Still, could Australia's model have some lessons for the United States? Joining me now to discuss is former Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd. He is now president of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Prime Minister Rudd, thank you for coming on the show to discuss this. Obviously, as I pointed out, there are some key reasons Australia's reforms can't be replicated exactly here in the U.S., the main one being, of course, the Constitution here. Australia doesn't have a right to bear arms. We do. But what do you believe is transferable from what Australia went through to what we're experiencing in the U.S.?
Well, I think there's two or three commonalities between the United States experience and Australia. And having lived in America the last 5 or 6 years, I fully understand the differences, including the Second Amendment. But here are two or three common factors. One, we Australians are freedom-loving people, and people have had the right to own firearms for a long, long period of time in our history. And because Australia is a rural country with large open spaces like in America, it's kind of been part of our upbringing to have firearms on farms, for example. I grew up on a farm in rural Queensland where my father had a shotgun which he used to suppress feral animals. So there is that similarity. The second thing I think is this: all of us, as Americans today and as Australians today, are horrified by the spectre of mass shootings. And when we saw this in Australia, big time, 25 years ago, with a mass shooting at a place called Port Arthur in Tasmania, the then Conservative Prime Minister of Australia, my predecessor in office, he initiated this National Firearms Agreement, which had bipartisan support from both the centre-right and the centre-left. And thirdly, the results are kind of in. 25 years later, the numbers are like this. In the previous quarter of a century, we had 14 mass shootings, one every year or two. In the last 25 years, since the National Firearms Agreement, we've had one, a family violence event involving 6 members. And secondly, in the overall firearms homicide rate and suicide rate, it's cut in half as well. That is, aside from mass shootings. So I think the writing or the report card is in. It does work. And frankly, there is no great reaction and demand from gun owners for any more liberal laws. It's working, frankly, just fine.
I have so many questions for you from what you just said. One is gun rights activists in the U.S. are concerned. One of their big concerns with more laws on guns would be it becomes a slippery slope that will then lead to them not being able, legal citizens being able to get their guns that they feel like they have, they do have the right to have under the Constitution. They're concerned that it will infringe upon their Second Amendment rights. What do you say to the slippery slope argument?
I don't think it's well-founded if the laws are robust. You see, under the US Constitution, the right to bear arms as part of an organised militia, and remember this was framed in the days of the period immediately following the Revolutionary War against the British, and the concern that the British would come back and you'd need an organised militia again to defend the Republic against the British. By the way, back in the 1780s and 90s, I would have utterly sympathised with that posture towards the British. Last time I looked, the likelihood of the British coming back and suppressing the American Revolution are fairly remote. So that's actually the black and white letter of the law context of where we saw the First Amendment framed. But the second point is probably more important, which is the right to bear arms is one thing, but it doesn't mean you have the right to bear any form of arms. If you take it literally, does that mean the right to bear arms says that you should be able to have your own field howitzer in the backyard? that you should have the ability to have an anti-tank weapon, to run your own drones, which are armed? Of course not. So having a single-action shotgun is one thing. Having a semi-automatic or fully automatic weapon which can kill dozens of people in seconds, that's something else. So you can have the right to bear arms if it's single action. The judgment in this country, Australia, is it doesn't entitle you to bear any category of arms, hence the ban on semi-automatic weapons in this country.
And we already have, I mean, one of the big questions is there's more guns than people in this country. I know in Australia there was the gun buyback. So, you know, there is that big question. But I wonder, as someone who was a world leader, as you see these mass shootings, again, nearly 150 just this year in America, as you see that play out, what is your reaction? What are you thinking? What do you think the world is thinking as they watch this play out in this country?
I think what the world is thinking is that it's time for America to act. Look, I've lived among you in the United States the last 5 or 6 years. I'm just back here temporarily in Australia at the moment. And I feel that as someone who lives and works in New York, that there is a feeling of anxiety that there could be a mass shooting today, tomorrow. When will the next one unfold on a school campus or a university campus or in a shopping centre mall? I mean, the terrible history of these things. And that's why, frankly, I applaud the leadership of President Biden in taking this first major step towards national firearms legislation and regulation, which he has foreshadowed. I know what the political reaction will be. I know that a whole bunch of states will say it impinges on their constitutional rights and the usual list of arguments. But I think if you polled average Americans, they want something done to reduce the risk of mass shootings.
Right. And they just want solutions. They want solutions. All right. Former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd, thank you for coming on and sharing that perspective and interesting discussion with you about this.
Good to be with you.